The decay of faith and its identity through a decline into unbelief and a different identity forms an exact parallel to their decay through a decline into a fearful and defensive faith. Faith is fearful and defensive when it begins to die inwardly, struggling to maintain itself and reaching out for security and guarantees. In doing so, it removes itself from the hand of the one who has promised to maintain it, and its own manipulations bring it to ruin. This pusillanimous faith usually occurs in the form of an orthodoxy which feels threatened, and is therefore more rigid than ever. It occurs wherever, in the face of the immorality of the present age, the gospel of creative love for the abandoned is replaced by the law of what is supposed to be Christian morality, and by penal law. He who is of little faith looks for support and protection for his faith, because it is preyed upon by fear. Such a faith tries to protect its most sacred things, God, Christ, doctrine, and morality, because it clearly no longer believes that these are sufficiently powerful to maintain themselves. When the religion of fear finds its way into the Christian church, those who regard themselves as the most vigilant guardians of the faith do violence to the faith and smother it. Instead of confidence and freedom, fearfulness and apathy are found everywhere. This has considerable consequences for the attitudes of the church, faith, and theology to the new problem posed by history. People grow tired of maintaining the open situation of dialogue in cooperation with others, in which the boundaries are always fluid, and looked for the final hour in which the only possible response is yes or no. It cannot be denied that such visions of the future exist in the New Testament, and that the crises of history may come to such a critical end, but nowhere in the New Testament does the end of the world bring about the second coming of Christ. The New Testament looks forward to the very reverse, that the second coming of Christ will bring the end of destruction and persecution in the world. Anyone who reads the signs of the time with the eyes of his own existential anxiety reads them falsely. If they can be read at all, they can be read by Christians only with the eyes of hope in the future of Christ. Otherwise, the apocalyptic interpretations of the age will be like the nihilistic attempt of the devils of Dostoevsky, who want to destroy the world in order to force God to intervene. Oh boy. This one's gonna be a doozy. Alrighty everyone, hello, and welcome back to yet another episode of my nonsense, and mayhaps also something of Belock's nonsense if he decides to actually come over here, Belock being my pigeon. But today we have quite the topic, and that is none other than a discussion of this book right here, which just came out on September 16th, 2025. As you might guess by the title, as you might guess by the cover, it is another Christian book that is very much out to speak the language of demagogues, which, again, we will get into. Before all that, though, again, hello, my name is Sara Streisand. I am a Christian witch, content creator, educator, writer, specifically a writer of this book right here, which is about to become very relevant as we go along this discussion, as to is its sequel, which is coming out this year, end of December. Discovering Christian Witchcraft is a book that is all about the basics of witchcraft, understanding what it is in the modern day, what the Bible actually has to say about it, and maybe something of why so many people seem to be blending aspects of witchcraft and all these other things with mainline Christianity. If you are curious about that topic, I implore you to check this book out because it's got all kinds of fantastic research behind it, like great sources. It very much is a one-stop shop, synthesizing tons of information across all kinds of different disciplines, and it's helped a lot of people just understand what the hell they're doing when it comes to both personal and communal faith. If you're not into all that right now, I do have tons of videos on here. I post one every Friday, so go ahead and hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell so you can stay up to date on everything that is going on. Whoop. There's my little man. What? Hi, Petey. Hi, Bubby. And if you are not new here, welcome back. Thank you so much for joining me again. And I will remind all of you that if you want to see these videos 2 weeks early and ad-free, all you gotta do is hop over to my Patreon, where I post these videos early as well as a lot of other cool stuff, so definitely check that out. But now, let me tell you a little bit about how I got to this video today. Oh my goodness. So, you know, this isn't really a new thing on this channel. Sometimes I do like to read the books by Christian thought leaders and Christian, pastors and such, who really seem to be alarmed at this continuing popularity, I guess, of witchcraft and neo-paganism and other such kind of, I guess, technically New Age religions and the like. Because maybe, right, despite all the research I've done in this book, maybe I am wrong after all. Maybe these people know something I don't, and maybe they have some sources I was unaware of that will point me in the right direction. Unfortunately, they are like 0 for 4 right now, but this book here that we just discovered, this one is one that immediately snagged my attention and that I had to take a look at, especially after my friend Beck mentioned it.
Hi witches! Yes, we're sitting in my car today because I have a few minutes before my doctor's appointment. But over the last few days, I've had a few people send me this really interesting article written by The Wild Hunt. So I've linked that down below. Now this article is about a book that came out called The Pagan Threat. It was written by a pastor and essentially like disavows a lot of the of paganism, witchcraft, anything that is not Christianity, essentially. And we can see who the foreword is by. Now, why am I bringing this up, and who am I? Hi, my name's Beck, and in 2023, the police chief of Hanover tried to arrest me for tarot reading, based off a law that is, like, steeped in anti-Roma sentiment and dates back to the 1800s. This is not a new mindset, but we are seeing kind of a kick-up of, like, anti-pagan, I should say, rhetoric, or anti-witchcraft sentiment. This is not me trying to fearmonger or anything and say, like, oh, you must hide your practices. In fact, this is the opposite, because, we still have religious freedom, for right now, at least, in our country. But I also think it's really important to be aware that these are some things that are being said. Now, I have not read the entire book, but there are some quotes in the article. But I think that there are some very concerning calls to action, even just in the foreword of the book. So I think it's really important just, again, to be aware of this and to stay safe and to foster pagan spaces and witchcraft spaces in your community. So hope everyone has a good Monday, fabulous autumn equinox, and I'll see you guys later.
Beck, also known as the Stitching Witch, is a witch in Hanover, Pennsylvania, runs their own shop, and also has been fighting quite the legal battle with the state of Pennsylvania for the better part of, I want to say, 2 years about the legalization of tarot card practices after the sheriff of their county came and, for lack of a better word, tried to intimidate them about their tarot card readings in the store. Basically came and said that despite the fact that there hasn't been any claims made, that if there was one, they would have to arrest Beck and all these other things, which of course is an infringement on one's First Amendment rights to practice their own religion. So that definitely go follow Beck and check out how that is progressing and going along. It's been a long ride, but it is bearing fruit, which is fantastic. But when Beck mentioned this book, especially, you know, noting the foreword by the latest situation that happened in September with this unfortunate bit of gun violence, I saw the title and knew immediately that we were in for such a ride that I had to go get the book just so I could pour through it, gather my thoughts, and share them with you all. However, as I was flipping around and leafing through it, looking at the table of contents, I certainly did catch some interesting chapter headers. All of the other interesting problematic stuff aside, one of them that caught my eye and gave me a funny feeling was definitely the term Pagan Christianity. And when I clicked on it, sure enough, lo and behold, there was my own name staring back at me in a place I never expected to see it, which only more encouraged me to read the whole book cover to cover and figure out what the context was of my being included in such a thing. Genuinely never in my entire life did I think something like this would happen, but hey. Before we dive into the book itself, though, let me tell you a little bit about this Lucas Miles guy and what he's got going on. So Lucas Miles, if you take a little stroll over to his website, definitely seems to be someone who runs in circles I certainly would never be caught dead in, but these circles right away tell me what kind of situation we would be dealing with, and that is one of pundits, one of some very, very biased views of the world, some very choice lenses on reality, right? We got ones like Fox News, we got ones like Blaze Media, which has its own interesting spins on everything. Newsmax, the Christian Post, I mean, you name it, dude's been all over those and seems to be in pretty good partnership with them. He is also a pretty big top head at Turning Point USA, which is, you know, the kind of political ideological creation of the late Charlie Kirk. So on top of pretty very clearly dropping his flag down for a certain team on the political aisle here, we also see this individual running his own church called Influence Church, which you can see their sermons for online. You can see how they look, how they go. They do seem to have quite the production quality for their sermons, different camera angles and all that stuff. Very, very nice, of course.
And you gave it all. You gave your entire life. Father, how many times we fall short in not giving our all.
Very confusing to my raised Catholic and very liturgical self as to why the sermons are like almost 2 hours, but I mean, hey. Their website does also outline their beliefs on Influence Church, which is pretty interesting. They mostly seem like par for the course. They don't seem like insane, although they very clearly off the jump have a very specific way of interpreting some things. And that does kind of signal to us a bit of kind of like a root problem that we're going to discuss in Miles's theology and the theology really of this entire side of Christianity, which is the refusal to fully acknowledge and understand the breadth of God's character, the infinity of God, and the way in which he has historically and continues to maneuver. We'll get into that. His wife is also apparently a pastor with him at this church. They are kind of like co-pastoring this ministry here, which is great, but again, something to tuck in the back of your mind for later as we get into this book. In terms of credentials, can't really find any like doctor in his name or anything that would suggest that he is a serious theologian, which is not surprising from what I've seen in this sphere. I would say those with PhDs and such are probably on the minority side of those who do not have them and yet still insist on counseling people spiritually. I can't say much myself. I'm in the same boat. I don't have a PhD. I'm an independent scholar and I do all my reading on my own time under the guidance of ordained priests, but nonetheless, it be what it be. So now that we've got something of a profile on this Lucas Miles here and his affiliations, let's take a gander at just the general overview of this book, because if you thought this was kind of normal, if a little, you know, biased politically, don't worry. Don't worry, because we are going to get into it. Oh my goodness. So, I'm going to start this by saying that when I asked God about how to do this video, God did tell me to not go for the throat, which I, in any other circumstance, would have been happy to do, kind of was doing as I was reading it, kind of got all of that out while I was reading it.
Abortion as a sacrifice to Artemis. This guy is out here really quoting fucking some Gillette Paris or whatever the fuck, the sacrament of abortion, saying that abortion is a fucking sacrifice to the maiden God.
But he told me to kind of simmer down and take a more balanced view of the situation, which fair, although I cannot exactly balance what I'm about to say as I explain this book. I wish what I was about to say was hyperbole. I wish it was straw man. I wish it was nonsense, but it is very much just verbatim what's going on in this book. And that is a general thesis that a variety of leftist talking points, specifically ones like climate change and like climate science, abortion, and transgender or just LGBTQ existence are actually part of some grand pagan plot, which he does use kind of interchangeably with Luciferian and Satanic, of this group of elites in charge of the globalist attempt to create a new world order that Christians in America have to stand against and deny, because otherwise our children will be groomed into these terrible Marxist, Hermeticist, pagan ideologies that will destroy America entirely. Yeah, that about sums it up. I'm not joking. I'm so serious. I'm not even joking. Like, I wish that was an exaggeration, but that is the book. Throughout the course of this book, this man kind of fearmongers about the COVID-19 pandemic and vaccine, insisting that the ease in which people were put into mass psychosis and had to abide by rules like lockdowns was a sign of like a pilot of how easily the government could control us all, and that this vaccine that we had to take was highly experimental and likened to the pharmakia, the hallucinogenic drugs used by sorcerers that the Bible mentions. The whole concept of globalism and a new world order in itself has historically been a massive dog whistle that he uses frequently, especially in the latter half of the book. He insists that all of this neo-pagan cuteness is actually just the topsoil of that deeper plot to control everyone and make one world government, consistently fear-mongering about the apparent loss of our autonomy as a result of these, globalist, Marxist, Hegelian, Hermetic practices and beliefs and initiatives, which will therefore strip us of also like our bodily autonomy, right? Like, for instance, he talks about people wanting perhaps health passports where you have to show proof of vaccination to go somewhere, or where some people suggested we should have like some kind of tracker that tracks everyone's income in the whole world or something. Man really thinks he's living in Project Ito's Harmony, is really all I'm going to say with the COVID-19 stuff. Dude is really fear-mongering about modern science continuously. He also is science denying in other ways. He will say things like so-called global warming, and insists that the idea of overpopulation is a myth, that the earth is not overpopulated, and that in fact actually it can totally handle all the amount of people we have on it, which maybe not. The problem with these kinds of statements really is that this man is not qualified to discuss what this means, because he is not an economist, a sociologist, any kind of biologist or anything. He doesn't have a definition for what overpopulated would mean. He doesn't have, any kind of, again, psychological or sociological credentials to talk about other things he talks about, like how women like Taylor Swift and Nicki Minaj are some kind of, like, smesh work icons, or who flaunt their body around, and how smesh work itself is a gigantic burden on society. Mayhaps, as all this stuff is being said in this book, this man might even make points that are worth talking about and considering with some nuance. The problem is, though, throughout this book, this man does not display once the credentials or the knowledge or the nuance or the expertise or anything to actually be addressing these topics. In essence, to really dig into this book, this man will talk about all kinds of political issues like abortion and, the LGBTQ community and everything else, just in a flow, in an inundation of information, more disinformation, that is very strongly forced through extreme language, through straw men, through all kinds of strange approaches to these topics, mischaracterizing people. And therefore, and because he does not have this expertise, he really creates a situation where this book is kind of just like a waterfall of attacks on certain political positions of the left that he either highly mischaracterizes or simply does not understand. And he covers that up with a use of very strong language and a use of, constant, like, demagoguery, right? Like, this is the language of demagogues that is being used in here, positing himself and others like him and, the church pastoral leadership as this hero to save America from the clutches of terrible immorality. And all in all, it's just a book that, if you are of sound mind and quality education, is very hard to read because it is so full of nothing. We've got all the classics in here. despite the fact that conservatives currently hold the presidency, House, Senate, and Supreme Court, that Christians are currently under fire the way that early Christians who had no political agency at all were, consistently drawing on quotes from folks like, say, Justin Martyr of the early church, and comparing the struggles of modern-day Christians to that time period. Constantly saying that they want free speech and that their autonomy is being encroached on, like when during the COVID-19 pandemic, churches had to, shut their doors and do social distancing, and advocating for Christians to band together and get more laws passed that enforce Christian values and morality, while then also talking out of the other side of his mouth and saying that, but no, religious freedom is a deeply entrenched value, and we must respect people's right to practice their religion, even the pagans and Luciferians and Satanists that are so dangerous and bad, with the caveat that, which is important, that they don't become dangerous to people or society, which, since that is left undefined, is anyone's guess as to where that benchmark will fall. And that actually, in fact, the freedom to practice any other religion than Christianity isn't truly freedom at all. So really, that's actually enslavement, and we should end that, because that is not the real freedom. The real freedom comes from Christ. And if all of that sounded like a lot, that's because it was. And let me be clear that this is not even all of it. Not even all of it. It's just that this video is already well over an hour long, and I cannot fit every ridiculous thing that happens in this book. As I said, this book is a waterfall. It is a never-ending barrage of buzzwords, fear-mongering, and extreme political bias with very little actual theological or academic or critical content to back itself up. Just like the quote I read from Jürgen Moltmann earlier, this is very blatantly, as this man focuses on the orthodoxy, not the actual denomination, but the just plain right belief of Christian practice, as this man focuses on bringing back the orthodoxy, the doctrine, the morality of Christianity, it just smacks of something that we've already seen before, and that scholars like Moltmann have already addressed, and yet it just never seems to go away. So while we have this strange argument being made here, and we have a lot of spooky words thrown around, I guess now would be a good time to talk about the actual quality of the argument of this book from my perspective as someone who does teach introductory rhetoric. Lest y'all think I was kidding when I said educator, yes, I do in fact teach essentially like the introduction to rhetoric, to making arguments, to, writing and informing folks through the rhetorical devices of logos, ethos, and pathos. And in my time teaching these things, I most certainly have learned a lot more about it. I had to, because that's my duty as an educator, is to know enough about the subject to really not only explain the very bare basics, but how it connects to every other facet of life, and how to identify the ways in which people are trying to kind of pull the wool over our eyes in their own arguments and publications and other such things. And so when I say that as a rhetoric professor, it wasn't really difficult to see what this man was doing, I will also say that you actually don't have to be a rhetoric professor to intuitively understand that this book from the get-go is a hot-whopping disaster. Again, I know I'm supposed to be being nice, but there's just only so many ways you can slice this. There's really... I gotta call a spade a spade. And right away, ground zero of this book, we are inundated with extremely heavily charged language, with extreme strict and narrow and rigid framing of the opposition, right, of the problem. It's very interesting also when I notice that things like woke or pagan are capitalized to kind of make them seem like this kind of coalescent entity or system of belief. It's very much pathos heavy. Pathos is the rhetorical device that refers to one's appeal to emotions, and it is the easiest one to use and the easiest one, in my opinion, to abuse. Rather than using logos, which is, right, an appeal to logic, facts, statistics, reason, or an appeal to ethos, which is, right, an appeal to one's credibility or the credibility of the sources that are being drawn in, Pathos is all about appealing to emotions, tugging on heartstrings, getting people afraid and therefore hooked in and ready to listen. Very much a way in which pundits like this can go in and turn off people's critical thinking once they become overwhelmed and afraid for their safety or the safety of those around them, be it family, friends, country, so on. So right away, when we have this foreword by Charlie Kirk that starts saying completely wrong things, like things that just aren't based in factual reality, like the idea that the Bible was awesome and perfect and never did things that pagans did, like slavery, which again, this is just factually incorrect, and you can just pop Exodus open and see the literal list of rules of how to have slaves in there, but whatever. And then we also have the first chapter, which is just immediately going about woke ideology and how this is all coming to basically just crush our society. This is intentional. They do this right away to set up a sense of fear that will make you stop asking questions, that will grip you, and that will get you primed to be on the defensive immediately. And when we do that, that makes it very easy to make the leaps of logic that this man then goes and makes, right? His biggest thing is that all of this stuff about, climate change and abortion and LGBTQ stuff and all of this, that it's all actually its own religion. Like, it's become a religion, and actually, in fact, has already been a religion. It is all just paganism, again, with the capital P, as if paganism is a monolith. It's also, thanks to old Charlie Kirk back here, painted as something that is very specifically progressive and therefore misaligned with the conservative Christian way. It's just diametrically opposed, which again kind of ignores the fact that some sections of paganism, like Norse paganism, are having quite the PR problem right now, as it is being inundated with actually right-wing white supremacists. Still, by doing all these things, by saying that something is automatically a religion, just because it has, according to Miles, because it has doctrine, high priests, and a punitive and purification system. By that he means, right, like literature and text experts who abide by the ideologies, and also a method of holding people accountable for fucking up. That constitutes a religion, which I don't know if he realizes this, but if you step back and look at that, that means that pretty much anything could become a religion. With this kind of shoddy logic, and this kind of attempt to push this idea of paganism and a different religion competing with the good and noble Christianity, he in fact actually creates a situation where pretty much anything like even medicine or dentistry could technically be considered a religion under this definition. If you have texts, right, holy texts, as in a body of scientific literature, along with these priests that act like arbitrators of this text, as in medical professionals, dental professionals, experts, and a system of, punitary action and also purifying action, as in, again, right, a board that decides to give or revoke medical licenses based on whether or not they've been caught doing malpractice or not. Suddenly, yeah, even medicine, dentistry, anything can become a religion with this insane definition, and that is part of the point. Using this kind of fear and this lack of reason, Miles takes people who are not well versed in these manipulative tactics and disarms them entirely, so that they then go and just accept the things that he's saying, so they don't think critically about things like this, and definitely so they don't check his sources and understand what the fuck he's trying to talk about. I'm not gonna lie, when I saw that there were notes instead of footnotes, first of all, I wanted to lay down and just cry. Why would you do this? Please, academics of any kind, footnotes, not endnotes. But anyway, so for one thing, I did have to go and look at all the notes and see what kind of stuff is going on there, and I will not lie to you, I did have to clown on him a little bit for this absolute lack of cleanliness in his citations. Not only as a rhetoric professor do I have to teach how to argue, I also have to teach how to cite one's sources, because that's a big part of ethos. If your arguments are based on bunk nonsense, you don't have the credibility that you claim to have. Even if you have those cute little superscript numbers that suggest that you cited something, the first time someone looks at the citations and sees this mess of a link, or sees that you are using the most basic of pages like Learn Religions to get your information, it's time to call into question what it is that you are actually doing and what expertise you actually have on these topics. When most of your citations are just links to random web pages, links to random news articles that kind of just make non sequiturs to your point, that just make it look like you have credibility without actually helping your point in any way. To the trained eye, people know that you're kind of full of it. My man, Miles, Lucas, if you're watching this, babe, what the fuck was this thing? Worse, actually, just to be petty, if you'll let me for a moment, I also had to stand back in awe and disbelief when I specifically saw links that had all of this. These percentages with the 20, what this is a symbol of is the fact that this man Googled something. He Googled something, and all of that percent and 20 in it is what Google highlighted for him when he searched it. When you Google something and you click on an article that has something to do with it, Google will go out of its way to highlight the part it thinks it's relevant to your search query. You have to delete that in order to just get the plain article, and he did not. So you can see exactly what it is that he was clearly searching for or Googling based on that, which is, it's just bad form and it's embarrassing. Now here's the real issue. This is why I have to tell my students to be very careful with how they are representing the people they're talking about, and why citations are so important. Because with citations, you can go and check the thing the person cited and see if this person is being taken out of context or not. And a great example of that shows up in this book is actually on the topic of abortion. We have a certain pagan and psychologist, Jeanette Paris, who wrote this book. It was originally titled The Sacrament of Abortion, but it is now The Psychology of Abortion. And according to Lucas here, this person is saying that, abortion is absolutely a sacred pagan right? Already was out there kind of throwing Native Americans under the bus earlier for this kind of stuff too, but specifically now we're quoting Paris here to say that abortion was a very sacred pagan ritual, and specifically that abortion was a bit of human sacrifice to deities like Artemis. And this is funny because anyone who knows anything about Hellenic polytheism, as in the religion of pre-Christian Greece and the Roman Empire and all that other stuff, knows that human sacrifice was not a regular thing in Greek religion. There are a couple stories where this happens, and it's not exactly a good thing. There is a concept of miasma, in which is like kind of ritual impurity, much the same, or at least similar way that Jewish people had their own ritual impurity around blood and, had that kosher law and things like that. So the concept of sacrificing children to a goddess would not ever have been part of the standard, like, public-facing religion, and people know that, who know anything about that religion. So, again, when you know things, like I do, you immediately know to check the source and see what is actually being said. And all it takes is to go on Amazon and read the frickin' sample of this book to realize that this person is not talking about an actual frame of pagan religion. This person is not talking about any actual, legitimate, historically backed practices, but this person is using Jungian archetypes, right? Carl Jung with his archetypes, to discuss the ways in which basically bodily autonomy is a sacred process. None of this actually has anything to do with Hellenic polytheism or with these religious rites. This is simply this person admittedly right there saying that they are just using Artemis as a stand-in for this kind of feminine duality, this, light and dark kind of situation, right? Looking at the symbolism of how one can be a goddess of the hunt, but also a goddess that protects wild animals. This is something that we see across many cultures, right? And this is an archetype that Paris is making use of to discuss the ways in which people can navigate how they are respecting their own bodily autonomy by exercising their right to be pregnant or not at any point. To say that abortion is a sacrifice of this is very much a symbolic thing to say, and is not a literal thing, nor is it, again, a historically attested practice. And I say all of that to make the point that when this is pretty much the only quote we get from Paris, and we get no other context like that. If you are one of Lucas's readers and you don't understand anything about that religion, you're going to read that and think that there genuinely is a pagan plot to just go and suck out a bunch of fetuses as some kind of grand ritual to the old gods, when that's not what is happening. That is patently not what is happening, and is an extremely dishonest and disingenuous thing for Lucas to paint it that way. Whether because he genuinely doesn't understand it himself, or because he just wanted to manipulate what his readers will think, doesn't matter, the end result is the same. And repeatedly in this book, Lucas will just show his entire hand, like his whole bias just out there, out loud and proud, because he knows his audience. Because he knows his audience, and he knows his audience thinks just like him, therefore he has no incentive or reason to play middle ground or be objective, and in fact he has incentive to play it up more, to fan those flames more, to get people more radicalized, more afraid, and therefore more deeply entrenched in the viewpoint that he's putting out. He will take the most innocuous statements. He will take people who, by anyone else's measure, are people who deserve respect and honor for their work in life, like former Assistant Secretary General Robert Mueller of the United Nations, and make them out to be some insane, loony, just conspiracy theorist or some kind of scheming New World Order situation that when Lucas then actually quotes them just falls flat to anyone who, isn't radicalized. The Robert Mueller one is especially interesting because Robert Mueller, as a person, is one whose life was just completely upended by war between World War II and everything else. As someone who lived on the border between Germany and France, and who was a resistance fighter for France against Germany in World War II, this is a man who's constantly had to deal with these back and forth struggles for land, and, trying to decide, is Alsace French or is it German? And trying to, struggle for resources, for power, for who decides to claim this land and all these other things. He has seen the horrors of war. He has seen what it has done. He has seen the many ways in which humanity has failed itself with this consistent just push for violence and theft of other people's lives and resources and identities and all these other things. And as such, he made it his life's work to push values of peace, values of unity. He was a large part of how China got into the UN. He was a large part of, doing all these speeches about bringing that political, that kind of diplomatic unity together so that people would not continue to be ravaged by war like we are still seeing today in places like Ukraine, in Gaza, and everywhere else. And it is baffling when you step back and understand that this Lucas whatever here is seeming to be an opponent of these things, because he says that this quote from Mueller is alarming. He says, consider this alarming quote. And that quote says, the human species represents an extraordinary progress of evolution on this planet. It will be even more astonishing provided we weed out the mistakes and wrong objectives which went to our heads. Enrichment, armaments, national sovereignty, militarization, overconsumption, waste on colossal scales, destruction of other species and of nature, violence, materialism, racial and sexual discrimination, overpopulation, extreme wealth side by side with extreme poverty, etc. These evils and wrong courses have been well identified by the United Nations, the planet-wide, human-wide, evolutionary meta-organism. Again, I, as someone who am not radicalized, I read that and I say, what is alarming about a man who accurately addresses these evils that get in the way of human happiness and human experience? What exactly is so anti-Christian about wanting peace on earth? Is that not what we were supposed to be doing here? His real issue comes from the fact that, of course, Mueller is calling this a meta-organism, treating the UN like some kind of big body that will just kind of encompass the Earth one day. Mueller was very idealistic about this, yes, but that is not a bad thing to want to see a world where we just stop killing each other for stupid shit. But still, that kind of bias is just endlessly leaking in and endlessly trying to make certain positions be what they are not. This is a fundamental hallmark of a bad arguer, of someone who is over-relying on pathos to just strike fear, to put himself and his church and just his side of the playing field as the safe place, as the haven of true Christianity, and someone who cannot make a position without relying on endless fallacies. No true Scotsman fallacy, which we'll see in a second. The straw man fallacy and the way in which he just creates arguments that no one's actually making and mischaracterizes people. And just a lot of other problematic stuff that shows that he really doesn't have the proper rhetorical ground to stand on. And in fact, one place where we can really see this language just going into overdrive is whenever this guy mentions Karl fucking Marx. Karl fucking Marx is this man's actual Satan, like this man's actual demon hounding him constantly. He mentions Marx or Marxism or Marxist ideology like 67 times in this book. I almost, especially towards like certain sections, the word Marxist comes up continuously. And the man also conflates Karl Marx. Karl Marx, the dude who was, historically not considered the best friend of religion. No. Lucas wants to say that he's also a hermeticist. Hermeticism, which is kind of sloppily outlined in this book, being basically, I want to say an everything but the kitchen sink type of philosophy based on the writings of a certain kind of mythical philosopher, Hermes Trismegistus, which is kind of just like a combination of Hermes and Thoth that kind of became his own character, his own mythic figure over time. And so this Hermeticism has all these interesting principles, which now in modern day, have guided certain orders, like the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, and like all these other groups. And this man, as you can see here, goes point by point through these 7 Hermetic principles, and just very, like, ham-fistedly tries to force his reading of transgender ideology into them when they really don't line up like that, and where people who are advancing trans rights certainly aren't thinking of the Hermetic principles as outlined. Still, this dude is desperate to connect everything to Marxism, despite never once actually quoting Marx himself. He'll quote everyone else about Marx, he'll quote everyone else about Marxism, but he will never quote Marx himself outside of the most bare-bones concept of seizing the means of production. Somehow, for Lucas, everything connects back to Marxism, despite him clearly not having a very good grasp on what Marxism really is. It is not just this, like, mindless New World Order, or whatever the hell he's saying, but that doesn't matter for his purposes, because he's too busy using it like a grand boogeyman, precisely because for many still conservative-leaning people, the shadow of McCarthyism has simply not receded from them. When they hear the word Marx or communist, they still absolutely lose their sense of critical thought and ration and devolve into that fearful, threat-based thinking. Lucas knows this, and he capitalizes on it when he says things like this in a conversation about yin and yang and also, like, ancient aliens of all fucking things. He says, but more often than not, this diverse, godless spectrum between mystic and scientific collides into an alchemical belief system driven by a leftist scientific propaganda and Luciferian religion. The glue, of course, that holds them all together is Marxist ideology. And what it is word salad. It's just word salad. Somehow, caring about the Earth and climate scientist, claims of the Earth getting to a point of serious concern. This is paganism, which is also somehow Luciferianism, which is also somehow at the same time Hermetic Marxism, and everything else in between, and it doesn't make any fucking sense if you actually know what any of these terms mean. They don't make any fucking sense if you actually have ever studied even a little bit of these things. But to people who are unfamiliar with this stuff, and who only know to be afraid of terms like Marxism, it all just sounds big, scary, and strange, and it also boosts Lucas up into looking like this more credible figure than he is, because he's using these big, smart-sounding words and positing himself to be a scholar or a leader of some kind. And the sources that he does use and take seriously are extremely biased to his position. He's trying to make the argument that feminism has always been bad and terrible by quoting books called things like occult feminism or satanic feminism. That shoots your argument in the foot. People can't take you seriously if you are just looking for sources that back you up and not ones that actually give you a well-rounded perspective. Or than that, sometimes his fucking sources are just some parent advocate writing tweets on Twitter. He actually goes and says, look, see, this person lays out beautifully this point, and just fucking quotes a tweet. Oh, That's not a source. That's not a source. Not an academic one anyway, like you're quoting it to be. Oh my god, Lucas. Ugh. So as you can see, just from the jump of like the way this man argues, you know that he's not equipped. He's not equipped with the information or the scholarly finesse to actually make his points. And this whole book, despite the fact that it had an editor, definitely reads like a very ham-fisted, kind of all over the place, honestly, ravings of a madman. There's no other way for me to say it. Sorry, God, I'm trying to be nice, but there's no other way to say it. There's no other way to say it. When I read this book and I see the way in which this man just kind of skates over points that clearly make him uncomfortable, doesn't address certain ideas at all, brings them up just to completely ignore them, just pulls out all the buzzwords and front loads all of that fear-mongering language to then make insane claims that have no basis in actual scholarship, fact, or reality, and so on and so forth. It's mind-boggling, and it's hard to follow, and it's impossible to take seriously, again, if you are a grounded, educated person. But that's the point. Lucas isn't speaking to grounded, educated people. He's speaking to people who will be dazzled by the occasional big words he uses, who will be turned around backwards, sideways, and up and down by the word salad he spits out, and who will be moved to fear by all of these buzzwords and other scary-sounding things he's lining up with the most insane, barest logical threads, if any at all. And even if I wanted to forgive him for his absolute lack of scholarly prowess here, even if I wanted to say, well, you know, he's just trying to pastor his sheep and he's trying to, you know, just speak on religious topics and, you know, isn't trying to be an academic or a scholar anyway, even if I wanted to give him that benefit of the doubt, the problem is his understanding of the Bible and of God and of religion is also likewise just so weak. So it was in the section about pagan Christianity that really highlighted to me this man's biblical incompetence, because the way in which he kind of goes through point by point all of these new age things that Christians keep mixing together into their religion, and the way he uses scripture to kind of give Christians talking points against them is silly. As I said, this book I wrote is going to become very relevant right now, because a lot of the verses that this guy's using, that he's pointing out, things like Deuteronomy 18, 10 through 12, which is like one of his favorites, I discuss it here in this book. In fact, I discuss it on my Deuteronomy specifically on my blog. So like, what he's saying this means in the English context is not necessarily what's actually being discussed. There is the problem. He says communicating with the dead is something incompatible with Christianity. And he describes it as, right, attempting to contact or communicate with the spirits of deceased individuals. This practice is typically carried out through medium seances or other rituals with the belief that the dead can provide insight, knowledge, or guidance. People may turn to these practices to seek comfort, answers, or closure from deceased loved ones, or to receive messages they believe the dead may offer. It is rooted in spiritualism, and it often includes practices like reading objects that supposedly carry the spirit's energy, or attempting to summon the deceased through chants or offerings. So for one part, he's describing a very specific iteration of necromancy. It sounds like he's describing things, again, from spiritualism, hoodoo, or mayhaps Santeria, or other things like that, but it's not really all of it. And on top of that, then he says this: communicating with the dead, whether through mediums or seances, is a form of necromancy and is strictly prohibited in Scripture, Deuteronomy 18, 10 through 12. The Bible teaches that the dead cannot communicate with the living, and that attempting to do so opens believers to demonic influence, Luke 16, 26. So, as if the Deuteronomy one wasn't already silly, the Luke one is really the one to pay attention to. I can understand people getting confused with Deuteronomy. They don't go look at the interlinear, they don't go investigate the actual meaning of words like ovni to oni, or consider the fact that this was a book for and by Israelites and had nothing to do with now Christians. But Luke 16:26 was my huge sign that this guy has no idea how to interpret scripture. Because here's what Luke 16:26 says, and at first we can maybe say, oh, okay, so, our boy Luke is here. He is saying that, see, look, the Bible says the dead can't talk to us because they can't cross this chasm here, right? They can't get to us. They can't reach us. They can't cross this. But then you look at the entire passage. But then you look at the whole story. You realize this isn't about the dead reaching earth. This is about the dead trying to contact those who are in heaven. Abraham and these other people are dead, and they are enjoying, their time basically in heaven, or in a nice resting place, whereas the rich man is down, just suffering in Hades, Sheol, whatever you want to call it. The chasm Abraham is talking about is a divide between heaven and hell, so that people from hell can't just decide to walk up into heaven and escape their suffering or something, or to escape their purgation or whatever it is that's going on. This is not at all what Lucas was saying that it meant. Moreover, I'm going to point to this example specifically with the necromancy because it also shows a fundamental theological incompetence. If you are a Christian, the whole concept of people being dead is not a thing. Right? Again, Deuteronomy, this is a book for Israelites. This is a pre-messianic book. This is a book before Jesus has come and, done the whole live, die, and come back situation. The thing is, when Jesus lived, died, and came back, he fundamentally changed the game theologically. While these kinds of people love to push penal substitutionary atonement, which insists that Jesus died for all of us, and if we don't do everything right, we're going to burn in hell forever, another theory adjacent to that, but in my opinion a bit more sensible, is Christus Victor, which insists that Christ defeated death. Christ is victorious is the meaning. Christ defeated death. Death no longer has a hold on people. Death no longer exists because everyone is alive in Christ. Therefore, technically, necromancy shouldn't even be possible, because if you're contacting someone who is no longer living on earth in a physical body, that's not necromancy, because they all exist. Lucas even acknowledges that this is a point of contention between Catholics and Protestants, and at the same time, the preachers of his own sermons also do seem to take a more Catholic approach to the idea of people being alive in Christ and not dead.
Jesus was talking to the Pharisees one time, and he says, isn't he called God, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? Remember that? He said, God's not God of the dead, he's God of the living. And I thought about that. Can I just be bold today and say, isn't he the God of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Charlie? He's not God of the dead. He's God of the living. Amen. Charlie has passed from this life, but he's still alive. And I believe he has joined that great cloud of witnesses around us, cheering us on, saying, come on, church, rise up. Come on, church, do something good for Jesus. Come on, tell somebody this weekend about Jesus. Come on, church, do something, and let's make heaven crowded. I think I can hear him saying it. Amen.
So this dude is out of step both with Christian theology and with his own pastors at that point. The language there, of course, it's a little facetious, right? Oh, I can almost hear Charlie. Now, of course, he's not quite serious there, but, if Lucas can say that people saying, oh, watch out, Gaia, Earth, is mad at us for all of our climate disaster, if he can say that's a sign of obvious pagan worship, when it's kind of metaphorical, obviously, then I can also look at this pastor in his sermons at his church and say he's being very literal and channeling Charlie Kirk right there and saying that he can hear him from up in heaven. See how that works, Lucas? See how when you say things like, look, they're obviously pagans because they're talking about Gaia, I too can play that game, dude. You're not slick with it. Now, one of the things that's also especially a sign of his lack of ability to research or understand anything about the Bible is actually the reason he included me in this book to begin with, which is basically saying that I am an apostate, a Christian in name only, and all these other things, because I use tarot cards. Of all the shit he could have pointed out, of all the things he could have said, that was all that he put me in here for, was to talk about my use of tarot cards. And of course, again, right, he can't quote my book, Discovering Christian Witchcraft, because that would kind of confuse people and blow a hole in everything he's been saying this entire time. So there's that. But he accuses me of having a syncretistic faith, which he doesn't realize by virtue of what we know about Judaism in the exilic period in Babylon, what we know about folk magic and folk Christianity, of Catholicism, and the switch from paganism to Christianity over time is literally baked into the religion. The syncretistic faith that I'm pushing, this pagan Christianity, according to him, is not real Christianity, even though what I'm doing has been done for centuries. Even though syncretistic elements like eggs and bunnies around Easter, and also, evergreen kind of stuff around Christmas, and bonfires and feasts around the summer solstice around St. John's Day, have become part of the religion. And he also says that I cannot be doing tarot cards because those are pagan in nature. Earlier, he says the Christian response to tarot cards is that they are full of pagan imagery, which is patently untrue. Tarot cards are a Renaissance invention, a card game from Italy, one that is actually still played today and that we've talked about before in this video and also on my blog. They don't have anything to do with paganism. It wasn't until the deck we have now, the standard deck, was made by Rider-Waite-Smith, that we started getting some esoteric symbolism, but a lot of that esoteric symbolism is Christian. We have Adam and Eve and the lovers. We have the Eucharist cup and also the Eucharist itself in Ace of Cups. We have things like angels. We have things like the devil. We have very Christian and also just general Abrahamic, right, because the Wheel of Fortune has Hebrew on it, iconography in tarot cards. So, what? The man doesn't know what he's saying, and he also doesn't know biblically that, yes, certain types of divination were allowed, like kleromancy or casting lots. He also doesn't understand what idolatry is, really. He kind of, grasps a vague idea of it when he, quotes from the Bible about these idols of stone and gold and bronze, but he starts calling pretty much everything possible an idol, saying that, progressivism, that just, inclusivity and all the and just abstract concepts are idols, which is not how that works at all. If he had ever read this book, The God of Old by James L. Kugel, he would have gotten a concrete understanding of what idolatry is, which is when you create those statues of bronze and gold and wood and what have you, and you try to drag the gods out of heaven to stuff them into the stone, to treat those physical items as if they are the actual gods themselves, so that they can answer your prayers faster. This is why God did not want his image graven in any way. This is why instead the Ark of the Covenant was made, that God could come into and leave at will at any time he wanted. That is what idolatry meant. That is what God was trying to avoid. Because he doesn't understand what idolatry is, his consistent claim that the Bible is inerrant, that it is perfect, that it is all these things that must be followed exactly, ironically makes the Bible more of an accurate idol than anything else he's mentioned, because he is trapping an infinite and ineffable God between the covers of a book. Moreover, as we saw earlier, his wife is a pastor, so for all his claims of biblical inerrancy, and all the pot shots he wants to take at actual decorated scholars like Dan McClellan for pointing out that it's not so, he can find a way to condemn our society for its shifting subjective morality, and that Christianity has per biblical inerrancy and objective truth, but then he can somehow negotiate away the parts that people have used of the Bible to insist that women should not be pastors of any kind. Well, yes, I have the apologetics to know that that's not quite right. Something tells me that when Lucas is still talking about complementarian roles of men and women, and that's why transgender ideology is so bad, something tells me he doesn't have these apologetics behind him. Something tells me instead that Lucas is so happy to point fingers at all these other denominations, which he calls just different expressions of faith, point fingers at society at large for their pagan ideology, and then still himself negotiate away positions that those like Catholics have held forever, that women cannot be teachers in the church, in church leadership, and also to completely ignore other uncomfortable things like slavery in the Bible and all this other stuff. His biblical worldview is therefore not quite biblical at all. And despite the fact that his church website kind of, posits themselves as a place that goes deeper than just, empty messages, deeper than platitudes, the reality is that because of this sheer lack of biblical understanding in this book, this sheer lack of research, this lack of perspective, this lack of actual theological work, like Moltmann, like Dietrich Bonhoeffer, like anyone else of actual interest, despite the claim that they work on real faith and not just all this empty shit, the fact of the matter is that that's exactly what all this is. And boy, oh boy, now that we've gone over the general understanding of this book, now that we've gone over a lot of the bad scholarship in it and the bad biblical understanding, I can tell you with absolute confidence the way in which Lucas tells on himself and everyone who follows him so severely with their understanding of biblical values and biblical objective morality. If there was ever a time where that well-worn platitude of even the devil knows scripture could be tossed around, it would be with books like these. Obviously, the language I've shown you so far has been so just out of pocket, so amazingly biased, inflammatory, and ridiculous, so full of falsehoods, disingenuous framing, and honestly mischaracterizations that border outright lies, that it's clear that if there were any spiritual fruits to be gotten from a book like this, they would be very hard, shriveled, and bitter ones, not the ones promised by the Spirit. This book is also just another insane example of the concept that every accusation is a confession, because Lucas wants to claim that these evil, Luciferian, pagan, climate sciences, New World Order, globalist, Hegelian, Hermetic, Marxist, fucking whatever, that all these people are grooming children, while in the next breath advocating for Christians to push for their laws to make it into schools, into civic life, into public life, right? They ignore that Christians are doing exactly what they say pagans are doing, and that, they're trying to push the Ten Commandments into schools and all this other kind of shit, completely ignoring the whole concept of separation of church and state. And also, with the way he frames all of this as a religion, with the ridiculous way he defines religion, as we talked about earlier, he reveals the insane understanding of religion that these people have, which is an understanding that seems to put every single thing that someone pays more than the barest bit of attention to as a religion. These are the kinds of people who are going to say atheism, as in the lack of theism, the absence of theism, is a religion. These are the kind of people who are going to say that, it's idolatry if you like a certain band too much, or if you like a certain hobby a lot, and it makes you not basically just staple the Bible to your eyes every 5 minutes. These people cannot fathom doing anything other than just devoting your entire every waking thought to religion, which is quite cultic behavior, and would also explain why some of their church services are like 2 hours long and seem to kind of be more like concerts and events than actual worship. For anyone to be dedicated to a cause or to have something that they stand for is to create, basically, in this man's eyes, another religion, is to devote oneself to these abstract gods that are competing somehow with the one true God. And that is such a tell. That is such a tell into their psyche, into their understanding of what is even going on here. He also tries to paint paganism, again, this very broad thing that covers multiple different groups, as some kind of apocalyptic end times, sky is falling, in his words, mess that's always keeping people afraid, completely ignoring the entire meltdown that, a bunch of people just had about the fucking rapture allegedly happening.
Don't forget to unlock your phone. If you are a pre-tribber like myself and you truly believe that Jesus is going to come and rapture his church here possibly within the next week, if not any day now, don't forget to unlock your phone, because I know a lot of people are writing letters or maybe even just doing things on their phone, like in the notes and whatever. Unlock your phone. I couldn't do that because I have bills to pay. I still need that information. So I just wrote my code on a piece of paper with a little message, and I took a picture of it and I made that the screensaver on my phone. I just want to encourage anyone who does believe in the rapture and you believe that it's going to happen soon to just be more bold about your faith.
As if the rapture and end times is not a consistent focus for these people who, one could say, act like death cultists in how they wish for the end of the world so that they can just avoid the mess they've made on this earth. Dude also hates all of this wokeism and all this progressive Christianity, which is so heretical, calling liberation theology heretical, liberation theology being the theology that guides and shepherds and helps oppressed people, which is a large part of what Jürgen Moltmann is talking about, and doesn't seem to have any awareness of the fact that his understanding of the Bible and his understanding of Christian values is also deeply rooted in these apologetics. He goes and says how to make his own version of apologetics for the modern era, outlines how Christians need to do apologetics now to defend the faith, without realizing that people can do apologetics in the other direction too. People can do apologetics in all kinds of directions. People can interpret the Bible pretty much any possible way. And that's why there's no such thing as objective truth, when the thousands of Christian denominations all have radically different ideas as to what this holy text even means for modern society and modern life. He also insists, through his close reading of the Apostles' Creed and the strange way in which he reads all of his personal interpretation of the Bible into the Apostles' Creed. I'm not kidding. He goes line by line and just inserts all of his own interpretation into it that is not inherently there. He insists that really, Jesus is the only Lord, and therefore we should not really be trying to make the world better by human effort. He says, by asserting that Jesus is seated at the right hand of God, it emphasizes his ongoing lordship over all creation, offering a stark contrast to the often horizontal, politically driven ideologies of the modern world, including those that seek to build utopias through human effort. But there is no contrast. The horizontal world of human existence and the vertical world of theology is something Jürgen Moltmann talks about. Is something that is inherently in the theology of the cross. By close reading these lines and inserting his own ideology into it, he actually paints a picture that is so contrary to the early Christians that he says we need to be more like. He doesn't realize that his insistence on individualism and the specialness and autonomy of every single person, and that's why collectivism is bad, he doesn't understand that that position that he holds is not necessarily a biblical position. And that, in fact, that is a symptom of American individualism that is not to be found, really, in the early church life. Especially when you have scriptures that talk about how the apostles all lived as one soul and shared all their possessions so that none went without, right? He is out here constantly decrying Marxism and this kind of share the wealth situation, while choosing to ignore all of the places in the Bible that talk about if you have two coats, give one to one who doesn't have it. If you are, all living together, you have to share your wealth so that all can eat and all can be clothed. He is ignoring the actual early Christian philosophies around community that folks like Mark A. McIntosh in mystical theology point out, where mysticism, the presence of God, was a communal experience where people experienced God together as one. He's missing all of that because that goes against the rugged American individualism, the capitalist understanding of American culture that he so desperately wants to defend, more than he wants to defend the actual Christ. This guy is so firmly in the clutches of not just a heretical version of Christianity, but a genuinely damaging and toxic, an anti-human version of Christianity. One that holds no love for people not like them, despite how they want to say over and over that they are loving. One that holds no grace for them, despite how they want to insist that grace is this thing that's going to, take away all our sin, and therefore cancel culture is pagan and bad. They're going to ignore all that, and they're going to show such a lack of curiosity to actually understand the roots of issues that people have, as well as their own role in causing those issues. For example, at one point, Lucas is talking about this study that's done where gender dysphoria seems to be on the rise in young people, especially in young women. Me, as someone who, is interested in people and is interested in finding the hurts of such things, I am saying to myself, wow, that's fascinating. I wonder what would cause that. I am thinking to myself of the reasons this would be so, why specifically girls would have more gender dysphoria. And I come to hypotheses like maybe it's because people like Lucas, with their insistence on God creating complementary roles for men and women, that have these young girls so earthly left out to begin with, because their local faith communities tell them real women are like Proverbs 31 women, or women must do X, Y, and Z, women must want a husband, women must want to be homemakers, women must want to do all these things because that's the natural order. And so when these young girls are sitting there thinking to themselves, that I don't want those things at all. I don't feel that way at all. They start to wonder if mayhaps they are not actually women. Again, just a hypothesis. It certainly doesn't account for all folks. Obviously, there are some people who experience gender dysphoria because they know that they are not women. But other times, there's a conversation to be had about, are people not women? Are they not a she, her, or whatever? Or have they just been told that the way they express womanhood makes them not a real woman, on some no true Scotsman fallacy type shit? Again, let me be clear, that's not every case, but it could be part of why that statistic is there. And yet there's no consideration for this, there's no curiosity, there's no acknowledgement of all these things that have happened. There is a barest hint of pastoral abuse on Lucas's part, barest hint of, bad actions done by people that don't represent God, of course, right? Just totally glossed over. And when he gets to his own apologetics and these 3 critiques of Christianity people have, he ends up not even addressing them, not even addressing really a problem of evil or anything else, and just going into waxing poetic and doing a really shitty fucking close reading of the Apostles' Creed and other things. He doesn't address the actual things, and if he does, he says they're exaggerated, or that, the Crusades happened a long time ago, why are people still bringing it up, and all these other kinds of things that just downplay the severity of the issue that the church has been facing. And so when we have this lack of curiosity, when we have this refusal to acknowledge the truth of Christianity, the good along with the bad, we actually might say that all of this right here, Lucas, it's actually a hell of your own making. I'm going to tell you something. There are ideas in here that I actually don't disagree with. There are ideas Miles puts out, Lucas, our boy here, he puts out, that I don't out of hand reject. The problem is, I know more about why these things are than Lucas does. I know more about these claims he's making than he does, and that's patently obvious, again, by his refusal to dig below the topsoil of any of his claims, his refusal to look at the skeletons in the closet of the church. For instance, right, there's a part where Lucas starts talking about the testimony of a gay man and his husband who, during the pandemic, when everything was all in disarray and people were all anxious and fearful and desperately looking for sources of comfort or control, Lucas points to this couple, one of which who says, right, that, look, right here, he was, buying a bunch of oils and crystals, he was just trying to look for some control, right, some kind of, empowerment, anything like that to survive these very unknown, tenuous times. And many times Lucas rightly says that people, they turn to things like witchcraft for a sense of control, for a sense of power, for a sense of, personal, feel-good type stuff, right? Like they want to feel better. They don't want to feel guilty. They don't want to feel attacked. They don't want to feel any sort of way. They don't want to, learn to have some discipline with themselves and deny their certain wants and beliefs, but to just have everything they ever want at any point with the manifestation and with the crystals and with the witchcraft and and all that kind of stuff. And I don't disagree with this. I don't disagree that people get into witchcraft and other religions for dumbass, stupid reasons like personal power and personal instant gratification and all these other things. Yeah, people do that. Just like they also get into Christianity for the same reason, because they want to basically just outsource all of their responsibility onto a divine other, because they want to get all these promises that everything's going to be okay for free, for nothing. Yes, anyone going into any religion for the wrong reasons is a thing that has happened, is a documented experience, a documented phenomena. Hell, Lucas is out here pulling out stats like there's a 22% rise in buying Bibles from, Gen Z and stuff, and acting like this is awesome. The same way he's decrying people going to paganism because they want power and stuff, he's failing to see that a rise in, or at least a supposed rise in church attendance or people being interested in the Bible might be for the same reasons, that we are living in very scary, tumultuous times, and people are looking for anywhere they can go to be told that it's going to be okay. People do this with Christianity as well, and to pretend that otherwise is very, very, very funny, if not just outright delusion on their part. It also reminds me of when Jesus says that some people's faith is like seeds sown into rocks, where since there's no soil, it doesn't really get any roots and is easily blown away. Let's see when times are a little bit better if these people stay with the religion. Let's see. Let's put a bet on it. But Lucas is skipping over something very important. In all of his railing against LGBTQ ideology, he just kind of skims over the fact that this guy said he left the church because for years he tried to pray the gay away and it didn't work, and so he left the church because the church did not actually love him. The church did not actually support him, help him do anything. The church did not understand him. And of course, he's not going to stay in a system that insists that he is inherently broken, for within our own understanding of this religion, now we know, is not a fault at all. There is pain here. There is pain in this church. And this guy, if he spent half as much time looking at the church and looking at the ways it has failed people than he does sitting here railing against wokeism and all this other bullshit, he might maybe actually start getting to the root of the problems. And I'm going to have to pull Moltmann out again. Because when this guy talks about how, all this wokeism, all this Marxism, all this and that, all this critical race theory and critical this and critical... When he's railing against all of this wokeism, he doesn't realize that he's actually spitting on the very way that we would actually, as a church, like a unified body of believers, get down to business and begin fixing everything that's wrong. Moltmann says, political hermeneutics reflects the new situation of God in the inhuman situations of men, in order to break down the hierarchical relationships which deprive them of self-determination, and to help them develop their humanity. So there is need for critical solidarity with these movements, for solidarity with them in the struggle against forms of inhumanity which threaten mankind, and for criticism and acceptance of criticism of the aims and methods of liberation. Political hermeneutics of faith is not a reduction of the theology of the cross or to a political ideology, but an interpretation of it in political discipleship. There is a grave risk of the immediate separation of faith and reason as of church and state, followed by a laissez-faire addition of faith and the church to that form of political irrationality which declares itself to be rational, and to unjust and lawless forms of the state. The freedom experienced in faith and practiced in the church can then coexist with any form of economic and social oppression. Furthermore, the freedom before God experienced in faith can be used as a substitute for the necessity of real political liberation in the world. The latter is then often slandered as an apostasy from the righteousness of faith and as a righteousness achieved by works. Finally, if faith only has an indirect effect on the liberation of political reason for its supposed rationality, then no interest or criteria are offered for a use of reason which may be termed human and rational. What often happens is a theological blessing on positivist reason, a rationality of mere ways and means in so-called real politics. The model is fundamentally a transference of the old potestas directa of the church in politics into a potestas indirecta. The critical distinction of this model may be important, but it is of little help in the individual case when the decision is made. One can still be for or against the peasants in the German Peasant War, or for and against Nixon's policy in Vietnam, for in such cases, what does reasonable mean? The liberation of the believer from the prison of sin, law, and death is brought about by God, not by politics, but this liberation calls for something to correspond to it in political life, so that liberations from the prisons of capitalism, racism, and technocracy must be understood as parables of the freedom of faith. In this model, a distinction is made between the great hope of the gospel and the little hopes which are necessary for the immediate future on earth. In short, whereas Lucas is out here throwing around the term technocratic too all day long, the reality is that he's already been beaten to the punch decades earlier by those like Moltmann. Moltmann, who was a soldier of Germany in World War II, who got caught as a prisoner of war and learned exactly what the ideology of his state had him doing to innocent Jewish people, who then spent the rest of his life, just like Muller, who also saw these things, working to heal the damage that was caused by nationalistic, authoritarian, fascist, horrible systems. Jürgen Moltmann's theology of the cross, of the crucified God, is one that absolutely pushes Christians to not just wax poetic about, liberation and freedom like Lucas is doing in this book, but to actually practice it, to actually demonstrate it. Moltmann says in his works that people leave the church when they find that it is no longer relevant to addressing the problems of our life, and people stay in the church when they are more concerned with their identity and their supposed true faith than actually acting on that faith. If people like psychologists and sociologists and nonprofits, charities, and all of these other people, these people who want policies for, social justice and help, if they have to leave the church to do these things, the church is fucking up. The church is missing the entire point of its existence, which is to, yes, of course, motivate and encourage people, but also to be a guiding beacon of how we are to, in fact, steward this world at all. To ignore climate science, to ignore the rights of all people to their own faith, to do any of these things is to fundamentally fail the Christian mission and fail spreading the good news of the gospel. To hold on to that rigid orthodoxy, as Moltmann talks about, is to make one's faith so weak as to insist that someone saying we should do meatless Mondays to help the planet is a threat to it. How? How, Lucas? How is your idea of God so fragile, so paper thin, so fucking weak that you have to sit here and point fingers at everyone else to run from the failures of your own institution? And even the people who do sit in your institution are still at a disservice. You want to sit here and wonder why people are running from the church and going into things like witchcraft and paganism, because they are looking for something that the church is not giving. And again, it's funny because Lucas will come out and say, bad theology is what turns people away, and then repeats bad theology. He repeats bad theology. He repeats his poor biblical scholarship, his poor rhetorical reasoning, his poor understanding of theological concepts like the problem of good and evil, skips talking about it entirely, honestly, even though plenty of theologians have, actually done the work to try and figure it out, and also decrying things like mysticism, which would actually help him with these ideas at all. He wants to say, well, no, God isn't bad, God is good. He wouldn't just punish us for no reason. It's just that when we don't do what he says, he gets really mad and has to punish us. Like, what? This is the kind of stuff, this is the bad theology people are leaving the church for. Because they're being told that God loves them so much that he has to beat them if they don't do what he says. That's bad theology. The whole idea of, well, if you don't do this, you're going to burn in hell forever, could easily be wiped away if you understood anything about the mysticism you decry, Lucas. I keep talking like this man's actually going to watch this video and comprehend a single fucking thing I said, but whatever. When he pulls up in his book a little table of claims and Christian responses or Christian thoughts that people can just kind of pull out, again, they say these platitudes, they say these things without understanding what they mean. They don't understand that, if people are looking at creation and deifying creation or whatever he says people do, that the Christian response isn't just, God is the source of all things, because people have heard that before, they know that. Lucas doesn't understand what this means anymore either. Maybe if he turned to mystics and saints like St. Francis, who told us to love brother sun and sister moon, maybe if he, had a little look at St. Hildegard von Bingen, who told us that crystals hold the light of God within them and terrify the devil because of that, maybe if he took a look at any of these mystics, including ones of the early church that he claims to love so much, he might have an understanding of actual theology. He might have an understanding of the true love and mercy of God that he claims is there and yet does not actually represent or demonstrate in any capacity through this entire book. People so run from the church, and also they run into these things that, as I said, I agree with Lucas on, they run into these things like witchcraft and paganism for instant gratification because they don't understand what it is they're doing, and they do that because the church never taught them right. The church not only never properly taught them about their history, mysticism, theology, community, actual proper biblical scholarship or any of that, never taught them any of that, but also actively dissuaded it. I get comments all the time of people saying they don't need any scholarship but the Bible, even though you can't make use of the Bible if you don't have the scholarship to understand it. They have created this environment where people are dissuaded from asking questions, dissuaded from thinking critically, or playing with different interpretations of stuff that's going on, where they are shamed and told they're not faithful, they're not true believers and stuff for having honest doubts about things. And they're also never taught how to actually investigate and properly analyze the doubts that they have. They're not taught how to find the answers for, if God good, why evil exists. They're not taught how to do any of this stuff. And so when they go to new religions like paganism, like witchcraft or whatever, Wicca, whatever you want, whatever, when they go to these new religions and spiritual systems, they apply the same inability to think critically, the same inability to vet facts and evaluate sources, the same inability to properly integrate and synthesize information to their new path. And then we end up with a bunch of people who just have no fucking idea what they're doing in any capacity. Blind leading the blind, people with no concept of what's going on. They just can't find any stability, any stable theological, philosophical, rhetorical ground to stand on. And these kinds of books that Lucas is putting out, they don't fucking help. Because all they do is peddle more buzzwords and bullshit, but they don't actually address the root causes of the issue. They don't look the failures of the church in the eye and recognize where they've gone wrong. And that is why when Lucas points out his fucking 12-step plan as to how to get the church back on track, it falls flat. So, I mean, thanks for giving me your playbook, right? Because I'm about to start my own ministry. But you, Lucas, you're never going to win. You're never going to win so long as you run from the accountability you fear so much. You want to talk about grace and how it erases everything, but in order to be forgiven of sin, you have to repent it first. And you have not. You have only doubled down on it. You've only made it worse. It's so simple to understand. A dog that is treated well by its master is not going to hide from its master. But a dog that is beaten by its master will absolutely run when it sees the master come home. The same can be applied for any church, any situation. Are you beating your Are you beating your people? Are you beating them over the head with shame, with fear, with rigid orthodoxy that only serves to poison the faith? Or are you loving them and giving them a tender hand, keeping stern boundaries, but still offering them that affection, that love, that grace, that mercy that you profess to be showing? The attitude of your congruence will tell you what you are doing. We have such a complete misunderstanding of faith, of God, of the role of the church, of the Christian identity, of social justice work and everything like that, that it's no wonder the church continues to dwindle. It's exactly as Moltmann says with his identity relevance paradox, with his identity relevance crisis. So long as these churches continue to act the way Lucas and Turning Point USA and Influence Church and all them act, there will be no redemption for the church as an institution. And this is where Christian witches are really a thorn in people like Lucas's side, because we aren't interested in attacking this immoral culture. We're not interested in attacking the hurt and the sick and the needy. We're interested in looking at the church and wondering why the hospital for the sick, as Jesus put it, right? The hospital for the sinners, we're wondering why this hospital for the sinners is kicking out its patients. We are all sinners. We learn this, right? If we are Christians and we're taking this seriously. None of us are perfect. All of us have made mistakes. All of us have done things. We've all had issues, whether in our control or out of our control, that have led us to sin in some way, to be angry, to be hateful, to be spiteful, to be vengeful, to be cruel, to be all these other things. But when Jesus sat with these people who were bitter and resentful and just hurt by these systems, who lashed out, who fell into such despair that it coalesced into something dark and cold and cruel. When Jesus sat with people who were sinners, he didn't sit with them to lecture at them. Jesus spent all of his time lecturing people who ground those poor folks' noses further into the law that because of the world around them, they just could not bring themselves to properly embrace, to properly understand, to properly follow. The law being to love one another. All 613 laws summed up by that one. So if people like Lucas don't stop their grift, if they don't stop churning out these horrible, inflammatory, incendiary books for the sake of making a quick buck, especially as we see here in the still of the sermon, right? Not a Bible in sight on this shelf, but certainly all of Lucas's fucking books on display. If they don't stop doing this, just pumping out more and more and more filth and noise and garbage into the airspace, they're not going to get anywhere. Their gardens, their spiritual gardens, will remain overgrown with weeds and destroyed. They will not produce the fruits that they're claiming they're trying to bring back. And that makes me upset, because I am not a Christian because I want to beat people over the head with my religion. I am a Christian because I believe in the theology of the cross, because I believe in a God who is the hero of the downtrodden, of the oppressed, who lifts them up. I am not someone who sits there and talks empty words about being the light of the world while decrying every single fucking person that tries to actually bring light to this world. As one member of the clergy said it, when I feed the poor, they call me a saint. When I ask why the poor have no food, they call me a communist. And of course, Lucas spends his whole book making damn sure that you and I both know he would never be caught within 5 million miles of the word communist. He is so anti-communist that he will preach this very kumbaya message of love and light and all these things, while standing in the way of every single institution that's trying to make that happen as some Marxist communist terror. He is more concerned with holding on to the image of what his idea of Christianity should look like, rather than actually advancing any of the causes that the gospel tells us to. These people say that you need to go tell people about Jesus, all this about Jesus, but what good is telling people about Jesus when all you've done is given them a name and not actually any relief that Jesus has told us to give them? Healing of the sick, feeding of the poor, clothing of the poor, and so on. Instead, people like Lucas and everyone who follows this ideology, they become exactly the kinds of cowards Moltmann says they are. They become exactly the kinds of whitewashed tombs that Jesus says they are. The concept of Jesus becomes some abstract idea where it's all just about showing up to church and being friendly on the surface, and it's not about anything else. And so despite all of the whining and crying that Lucas wants to do about how pagan Christianity is syncretic and tarot cards of the devil, and I and anyone else can't do that, the reality is I asked God about Lucas. I asked God about Lucas, about the kind of person he was and what I should know about him, and I pulled these cards. King of Swords reversed, Knight of Swords, and also Queen of Cups, which very clearly told me what God also has to say about people like Lucas. That they will cut down anyone in the way of their ideals. That they do not care about the consequences of their actions, that they're so lost in their logic and their ration that they forgot the actual heart, the intuitive center of all of this. They forgot how to actually love because they've lived so much in their head, in the orthodoxy of what is right and what is wrong, and the legalism of it, that they've forgotten the entire point of Jesus condensing all that down into one commandment in the first place. And God tells me very clearly that while there is a time and place, right, to do as Jesus did, and to turn around and rebuke this kind of nonsense, just as Jesus rebuked the Pharisees and other crafty-ass people trying to catch him, so too is there a time and place for me to address this. If people like Lucas want to come out here and start throwing names around, start throwing pot shots at scholars like Dan McClellan, start throwing pot shots at random practitioners like Thorne, start throwing pot shots at people like me who are actually trying to fix the problem, sure, I'll take a boy to church, that's fine, but the reality is that my work lies elsewhere, and that's the entire point of what I do here. When I'm making books like Discovering Christian Witchcraft, Discerning Christian Witchcraft, when I'm making cute little tools like my Christian Tarot Planner and all these things, when I'm making the ministry that me, my friends Lena, Hannah, and Mimi, and I are all out to create in 2026, we're doing this so that we can actually work on addressing the problems that the institution of the church has put forward. We don't run from these problems. We don't run from the truth of all of the skeletons in the church's closet. We address them, we acknowledge them, we atone for them by making space, by trying to actually go and do what the gospel demands we do. The ministry that we're all going to make in 2026 is going to be, hopefully, God willing, a wellspring of mutual aid, right, of charity, of fellowship, of proper education, of guidance and comfort, not in a worldly sense of being told what you want to hear, but in the sense of actually learning why the good news is good news. Our ministry as Christian witches, and also as progressive Christians, right, as Christians who don't have anything to do with witchcraft and still just want to understand and practice the true gospel, exhibit the fruits of the Spirit, they are all focused on the same good news, which is that, yes, the institution has hurt people. And yes, it's understandable that people would leave the church. But no matter how one has been hurt, no matter how angry one gets at that, rightfully so, no matter how downtrodden one becomes, no matter how far one walks away, they are always welcome to find not the Jesus that people like Lucas paint, these extremely authoritarian, individualistic, and unhelpful concepts of divinity that only serve to give lip service but no actual help. They are invited to come back and see not that, but the real Jesus, the real Logos of God, the real way, truth, and life. That is not just a man, that is not just any one specific concept, but that is literally the way of divinity, the very culmination of the law, which is to love one another, to be just, to be righteous, to be merciful. Any mystic will tell you there are in fact many paths to God. There are many. And those paths, they all bring you to that divinity. And there is no one who is too broken, too sinful, too lost, or too long gone to miss out on that connection to the divine. That is the good news. There is no one who has fallen so far that they cannot see the light of divinity still reaching for them. That is the good news. And as I have learned church does, we are out here to make this ministry, we're out here to do this work, we're out here to provide these answers and to provide these solaces, these directions, so that people can be motivated and empowered and encouraged to actually let the spirit of divinity dwell within them and act on it, to make the world better, to feed people, heal people, clothe people, to advocate that our governments that handle these systems allocate our resources accordingly, take our taxes and all these other things and allocate them accordingly, so that in the wealthiest nation in the world, we don't have so many people living paycheck to paycheck, deciding whether or not to buy food or pay the light bill, or any of these other things. There's no reason for this. This is what goes against the gospel. This is what goes against Christian fellowship and early Christian living. This is the actual problem. Not if someone decides to go dress in drag. Not if someone decides to go talk about Gaia and wax poetic about the earth. That's not the issue. There is no global conspiracy of nonsense. There is only many different countries trying to work together in an interconnected world and maybe not constantly cause death, famine, war, and destruction all the time. So long as people like these try to put limits on an infinite God and try to confine the good news to something that serves institutions of oppression instead of dismantles them, the church will continue to die. It will continue to rot as a rotting limb just falls off of necrosis. It will just continue to fall away. And it will continue to be reborn in different iterations, like Christian witches, like progressive Christians, like all the people who are actually doing the fucking work. So, on a lighter note, I guess that's that. I got dinner cooking, and I want to go eat because I am hungry. So, I will see all y'all next time. Please tell me in the comments what you think about all of this below, and I will see you next time. I hope you have a fantastic weekend. Goodbye.